All right. Well, doesn't look like anybody's here, but that is okay. Let's see here. Oh, it looks like one person has made it, which is good. Is there a way I can boost the audio? Hey, Lionel, how's it going? Hopefully you can hear me. It looks like I forgot to set up a lot of the notifications for this, so I don't know how many people actually are aware that this is going on. So we'll give people a minute or two to make it in, and then I'll get rolling because nothing else. I need want to get this recorded so I can use it on the channel later. Uh, quarter asleep. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at right now. Can you hear me at least? It looks like audio is coming through, but I'm never sure. But yeah, I had a real rough workout today. Well, it was a really good workout, but it was really intense, and I am pretty wiped. Okay, do my best not to yawn on stream, but oh yeah, with your time zone, I'm assuming it's pretty late there. Well, thank you for making it. Okay, well, I'll I will go ahead and get started. Hopefully, I'm assuming you can hear me. If not, I can start over. But all right. So this is part three of the Alomancy deep dive deconstruction, and um, not quite sure how I feel about how I have it broken up. So definitely open to feedback of how to split up this kind of content in the future because I definitely want to do this with more systems. But regardless, today, so we've looked at the details of what the magic is, and we've talked about like how it was used by both the magic users and by Sanderson in terms of using it for his story. Today is going to be talking about why it works and why it works the way it does. And this is going to be a bit of revisiting some of the restrictions and limitations that we talked about in part one. And this is part of what I was thinking in the future. Maybe just part three will be the deep dive into the restrictions and why they're there and how they work. I don't know. We'll see. But we're gonna walk through some of the testing and talk through some of the stuff, and hopefully those things will start to make a little bit more sense. So the the biggest thing when we're talking about how it works is understanding that this is a rational magic system. That is the most important thing when it comes to this aspect, at least with this system, because everything stems from that. It's all about taking the information that we have from the previous discussions that we had and expanding it and breaking it down and extrapolating from it. That's what all of this is about. So, when we're when we are testing our systems, because that's where a lot of this is going to come into play, figuring out how it works and why it works and how to tweak things to make it work the way that you want, it's going to be through testing. And for the most part, I generally break testing down into one of a couple of types. The main two being um like oh, my brain just froze. Being quantitative, using numbers and patterns and really focusing on the hard technical side of it. And the other one is more experiential and exploratory and scenario based. We're going to talk about each of those a little bit. As always, got my notes. So we'll be going through that. Yeah, that's really the first thing that I wanted to talk about because with the qualitative testing or the quantitative testing, this is true for any magic system, not just Alomancy, but when you quantitative testing is not always feasible. It's really going to depend on the nature of the magic and how things are being implemented. So there's a lot that we can't actually apply this to. For example, the mental metals. We don't have a quantitative way to really break down how effective the metals are at pushing and pulling on people's emotions and how effective it is at cloaking or sensing other elementic pulses. You might be able to do something with bronze, which is the basically the magic sensor, being able to pick up when other people are using it. You might be able to do something with that where you're picking up on how far away people can be and you still hear them using the magic. But for the most part, the primary thing here is iron and steel, because that is the iron pushing and steel pulling. And people who are physics nerds probably figured all of this out when they first listened to the book, but it's okay. Something I enjoy going through. So the biggest example of what I wanted to talk about here was figuring out why both the coin shot aspect and the ability to fly through the air aspect both work within the context of the same system, because they actually do. So and that's just pulling in some basic physics. Force equals mass times acceleration, right? So if we have a coin, a quarter generally weighs, it's something like 0.0056 kilograms. I, on the other hand, weigh close to 101 kilograms. So, and going off of the calculation of how much force would it take to launch myself into the air like Vin or Kelsier does. Assuming I am able to launch myself at a rate equal to, so that I'm flying about I'm accelerating about the opposite of gravity, that means I'm actually accelerating myself at twice the twice the rate of gravity. Because if it was exactly even, then I would just be floating, and then I do another and I start falling upwards as though I was falling downwards, which is what he does in Stormlight Archives. But if we go with that amount of acceleration, for me to jump into the air like that, the way the Mistborn do, that would take a total of nearly 3,000 newtons. Move that over to the coin, just because of the significant decrease in the mass, the amount of acceleration that we could achieve with the same amount of force is way higher. It's actually, you would be able to accelerate the coin. So for myself, I would be accelerating myself a total of 29.43 meters per second squared. Then minus gravity on there, then it's 21 point no 20.6 something. So with the coin, the total acceleration is 530 no 530,793 plus some decimals meters per second squared. So anybody who is curious, and that's just where this math would have kind of worked out while Sanderson was building this. If he thought, I want people to be able to jump through the air by pushing off of coins and nails and that kind of thing, that's cool. I want that. What does that mean? Going through the force calculations of, if it's generating 3,000 newtons of force, what else could I do with 3,000 newtons of force? And that's really where the coin shot idea could have come up from, was just looking at the numbers to compare some of that. And we'll talk about this more in how we can change it when we get to that talk. Trying not to yawn. I'm so tired. But it's fine. So yeah, coin is accelerating at like 530,000 meters per second squared. To compare that to some other stuff, a bullet from a Winchester rifle, those generally weigh between 0.006 and 0.009 kilograms. So even on the heavier end of the bullet, and obviously this all varies, but just the explosion of gunpowder, they're generally accelerated about 300,000 meters per second squared. So yeah, it's perfectly reasonable for us to be able to turn coins into bullets with how this magic system works. And that's just a basic example of how you can use some of the math to test through some of this stuff. So then if there was something else you wanted people to do, you have the numbers, you could move through it. So another calculation that you can do is which is pressure, which I probably shouldn't have brought up because I cannot remember the formula off the top of my head in my current state. So that was a bad idea. But even just looking at kinetic energy of just looking at kinetic energy and comparing that to things and seeing what you could do, you can sit down and do the math of thinking like, if I wanted them to bend a sword in half, could they? How much force would that take? You can sit down and you can actually run the numbers. Now, I'm fairly confident that Sanderson did go through a lot of this math because of the type of guy he is and because of what his background is. He doesn't really go to this degree. I doubt he went to this degree when dealing with the physical metals of pewter and tin. Likely because he didn't have the background in dealing with that kind of biomechanical stuff, which is fine. So he's still focused on doing the extrapolation from, if I am enhancing strength with pewter, what else would that enhance? What would I need? If the point of this metal is to turn me into an unstoppable fighting machine, what would that change? So that's where strength, endurance, and dexterity comes into play, which, now that I think about it, that's something that I think would be a pretty cool use of pewter, is basically somebody using it for extreme parkour. They probably could. And that's sort of how that works. And tin, we've talked about a little bit before, where it has the magnification of the senses, all of the senses, and really looking at exploring what that would mean. So yeah, that's the basics. And this is part of where, when I was writing all of this down, I was like, I'm not sure how great a talk this is going to be. And it's hopefully it's helpful, because I'm not super thrilled with it at the moment. But the other main type of testing is the exploration and the scenario-based testing. And that's where you're trying to answer specific questions like, what does the most extreme case look like for this? What is the most subtle way that people can use this magic. Not gonna yawn. Not gonna do it. What is the most subtle way that people can use the magic? And really looking through those aspects to see where you can go, which then, once you have those pieces figured out, that's when you start applying the restrictions. And this is where, in the future, I think this is probably going to be the place that I talk about restrictions, because it seems to meld together. With that, I actually want to look at some of the metals and talk about how the restrictions we have are useful and which parts of like the god factors and that kind of stuff he was addressing by adding these in, and why adding these things in was useful. Now, for the most part, most of the limitations that Sanderson added to the system, whether that was all done intentionally or not, they were basically added to scale back the power and efficiency of Mistborn and of Mistings. Because the way the powers work, they're very potent on their own. So all of the restrictions were ways to pull it back and make them less godlike and make it so they were more vulnerable. They did need to do things more carefully as they pushed forward. So, for example, if we're looking at the God factors, which if you guys haven't heard me talk about the God factors before, God factors are states of being, basically, that the closer you get, the closer your character is to effectively being a god. And with those, you have all-knowing, so omnipotent, omnipresent. They can be anywhere, at all times, anytime. Nothing can stop them. Omnipotent, unlimited power, and with omnipotent, I also kind of include unkillable. You can consider that your own god factor if you want, but being unkillable is a good one, however else they do it. And then unlimited wealth. So, omniscience is a potential problem with the way the metals work, especially when we're looking at zinc and brass, which is manipulating the emotions of others. Because that's actually a limitation that he has in there, is you don't get to feel other people's emotions. The magic does not help you feel what they are feeling. You have to guess, and you have to be a good people person, which is great, because if it did give you information, that would push them closer towards the omniscience. Because if you knew exactly what they were feeling, and then you could nudge it and really watch their behavior and get that kind of direct feedback, it would be even more broken than it potentially already was. And if you were able to add any kind of picking up on how emotion rippled into thought, that would take it even further towards the omniscience track. Now, there's also some issues with copper and bronze that were avoided by dealing with that. Copper primarily was put in as a blanket stopgap for a lot of the other powers. It made it so that bronze could be there. So bronze lets you detect magic users when they're using their magic. That added threat into the story, and it made it so people could track down Alomancers and know what was going on and find them and deal with them, especially the Canton of Inquisition that had souped up bronze on a lot of their inquisitors so they could pierce copper clouds. Not gonna yawn, I promise. So bronze was kind of introduced that allowed a bunch of these story aspects that some of them we talked about in the previous talk. And then copper was introduced as a counter to that and to the emotional metals, because you can't affect somebody who is in a copper cloud. Another limitation being put in place to dial things further back from people being omniscient and omnipotent in both cases. It's a way to be immune to this very potent magical manipulation. But more interesting to me when we're talking about the god factors is gold and electrum, because gold, let me double check this so that I get this right. I had the tab open and then I closed it. Of course I did. Yes, gold reveals your past self, and electrum reveals your future. Now, and then malatium reveals somebody else's future, which was the 11th metal that they used on the Lord Ruler. Now, with that in mind, the reason that is important. Oh, where did my screen go? There we go. The reason that's important is in the books, the visions of yourself, they're just visual. So it's not actual time travel. There's not much information gained. If we change that, things would be very different. If you were able to talk to your past self, talk to your future self, see more of what was going on around them, that could start to be a problem with omniscience. But fortunately, with the way it is, it's not a very big problem. And that brings us to omnipotence. We don't have to deal. This is actually one of the things that is really great about Alomancy by itself. Is on its own, it doesn't have many power loops or recursions. So people can be strong. No yawning, I promise. Okay. People can be strong without it getting out of hand. The exception to that being atium, because the information that it gives you makes people effectively unkillable for a short period of time. Really, the only way you can deal with somebody burning atium is to burn atium yourself and basically cancel it out, and then you're on a level playing field. With a couple of weird tricks here and there. But that's the closest they get. And restrictions and stuff that he puts into play to deal with that, that goes back to the nature of how it works. With metal has to be consumed, and the metal gets destroyed as you produce the power. That's another part of the brilliance with this. Automatically puts a ticking clock, and it gave him a dial that he could adjust based on the potency of the metal. That is why atium burns faster than any of the other metals. It's the most useful. From a storytelling perspective, it's the most useful for people, so to balance it out, it burns faster. It makes perfect sense. And when you look at the ones that are less effective and less flashy, those burn slower. That's just a power balance thing. Tin burns fairly slow. Pewter burns slower too, at least slower compared to iron and steel. And then from what I remember, copper and bronze burn glacially slow, which makes sense. They don't do a ton. So from a balance and storytelling perspective, that's great. It really balances and evens all of that out. And this is kind of what I was wanting to get into of how it works. Because of how he adjusts this, it makes a balanced playing field across all of the metals. Metals that are less effective and less generally useful are situationally useful. They deal with some of the power creep and potential power problems, and they are also cheaper, and you don't have to refill them as much. So these are all a bunch of little dials that he adjusted to get things really balanced in properly. But there's not just, with omnipotence, there's more than just atium. Pewter is a potential problem as well, because it increases people's durability. It's something that they address in the story. There's a number of ways to do it where, yeah, they can shrug off injuries, but then they might die later, and injuring them certain ways will cause different problems. One thing that wasn't clear in the stories, I felt, was if it made people's body physically tougher or just like less prone to breaking. Because if that was the case, something that really didn't get explored is you could explore different types of weapons to inflict damage that is going to slow down a pewter arm, somebody who's dealing with pewter. That would be a countermeasure that you could introduce. He talks about it a little bit in the second series, but even then, not much. Some of the things I'm thinking about, especially as you get into more advanced stuff, would be electrocution. Because it doesn't matter how resistant you are or how strong you are if all of your muscles are seizing up. You're just going to be kind of stuck there. But that's one that had the potential to go there, and he sort of just set caps on it. And also a big enough injury to the right part of the body, and they still drop. That was a big part of it. Specifically, though, there's pewter and duralumin, which didn't really get into in the book. Duralumin itself is a potential omnipotence problem. Because what it does is while I am burning any other metal, when I burn duralumin, all of my duralumin gets used up instantly, and that activates all of the metal that I'm burning. So you get basically an explosion of power of whatever it is you're using. And Vin uses this to good effect with both emotional Alomancy to control the Koloss, and with steel pushing to throw herself and throw people far distances, and pewter to endure what's going on there. There are some other interesting things that could potentially mean. And this is the part where this is not me knocking how Sanderson wrote the story. This is just me pointing out where things didn't get explored, that if you did something similar, you could. With pewter, if we dug into how resilient it makes you, like, does it just make it so you can tank it more, or does it literally turn you into Luke Cage, right? Because if it turns you into Luke Cage, then you could start doing things of burning pewter and duralumin to withstand things like explosions and stuff like that, which could potentially get out of hand. But again, with how he has the burning set up, especially with duralumin doing the flash burning of everything, that balances out, because you then immediately need to replenish, slowing down how frequently you could use it and that kind of thing. That's where a lot of this works without getting out of hand. Now, omnipresence and unlimited wealth aren't really an issue with this system. Yes, you could hire out your skills, which a lot of people do, but allomancers, especially mistings, are prevalent enough that it's not something where you're just going to be infinitely wealthy just because you have the power. They don't really have anything that allows them to make wealth. The most profitable thing probably to do is to be a thief, which our characters do. So that's how a lot of this all kind of meshes together. And I'm going to take a look at the restrictions and stuff we've got to see if there's anything that I forgot. Only one power. All power. Metal consumed. Yep. Negative side effects of overuse is just another thing to dial back how likely people are to do certain behaviors. But so I'm just going to read through some of the ones which we talked about in the other video, right? We have metal only. That's an important thing. So only being able to affect metal, and only being able to affect metal directly towards and away from yourself. We already talked through the math about how we can turn a coin into a bullet. If there's no limitations on that unidirectional stuff, that starts to get out of hand very quickly in terms of power. Unless you introduce additional restrictions so that I can't do things like break your arm, or I don't know, like pull a car in the way and hit you with a bus, pull branches from trees down on top of your head. If I have complete control and can push in any direction whatsoever, all of that stuff starts to become possible, and this kind, and word to more general telekinesis. It's one of the reasons that telekinesis is one of, if I had to pick, that's probably the power that I would want over almost any other power, because it is so versatile and so powerful. If we take that force, I can turn a coin into a bullet, and then you take away that I have to shoot it straight forward, and I can just take something in my hand and zip it to the side. Even if I had to deal with force vectors, where I had to pull it towards me, pull it straight towards me, and push from the side, like if I was limited to my body, just that sheer amount of acceleration that I could manage means this could be turned into a deadly weapon in any direction rapidly. And me being able to do things, again, when the force is pushed, it goes directly towards the center of mass of the object. That's another important balancing thing, because that's why if it wasn't just metal, I would be able to break your arm. If I have enough power to throw a person into the air and turn a coin into a bullet, breaking your arm by pulling on your elbow and pushing, well, not even your elbow, by pulling here and pushing here, that's going to be easy. That's going to be really easy. So that's where a lot of this kind of factors in and really tones down the balance with that. And that's why it's something you need to pay attention to. And there are some weird spots in the series where, like, Kelsier specifically can push on specific parts of the metal, but then that doesn't ever really come up again that I remember, which is, that's a thing where I think there is an actual limitation there, but he wanted this cool moment. So kind of rule of cool ruled out there, because if you do that, there is a bunch of stuff that you could do. Like, and part of this is just from my experience with martial arts and the way and my experience with physics, because of the way leverage and stuff works. Somebody holds a sword, right? Or even just a knife. Somebody is holding a knife. You don't have to knock the knife out of their hand. You don't have to push it so hard that they let go, when you can push it on the tip of the knife and bend it away. So if you wanted to, and you were doing something similar, you could get into a bunch of very interesting things like that. Like maybe dial the power way, way back, but increase the pinpoint precision of what you're pushing on. Because then you could start doing things where, like, you get in a knife fight and you're pushing on these little bits of metal to redirect people's punches and stuff just enough for it not to hit. I'm kind of just rambling at this point. That's the main stuff that I had to go over with this. So this one was definitely shorter than the others. And next time, it's really just going to be, I'm just going to list some specific variables and talk about how we could change it. Kind of like what was doing here with, like, if you change the way the telekinesis worked, here's what that could mean. But specifically, I want to look at things like the blueprint, for one, and some of the aspects of the magic itself, so that we can look at how tweaking some of those things can lead to a very different magic system very quickly. Because that's one of the things that I really nerd out about a lot, and I think is super cool. It's actually not too once you figure out how to do it, there's a lot of ways that you can take your favorite systems and turn them into new but similar systems in very interesting ways, if that's what you want to do. But I'm going to stop the ranting here, and I guess we're just going to go to the Q&A. It looks like we've just got a couple of you guys here. If you have questions, awesome. Happy to answer them. If not, that is okay too. One thing that I do want to mention, and I'm going to grab that. So next week, I have started doing Zoom meetings explicitly for people on my newsletter. because there's a group on my newsletter that I call the Cabal. That's people who want more than just the monthly newsletter. And if you want more of this kind of stuff, I highly recommend it because that's where at least once a month, sometimes twice a month, I'm doing more detailed articles like the blog posts that I used to do on various topics. Anyway, I'm going to be doing a Cabal exclusive Zoom meeting next week, and there's been a lot of progress with the books. And one of those things is that we have some cover concepts. So I'm going to be showing one of the cover designs that we have to people when we do the Zoom call. And I dropped a link in here. You can join the newsletter there. If you if you join and you if you join, shoot me an email and I'll make sure you get the information for the Cabal. So yeah, but that's looking good. We're not sure when book one is going to be released. My my current guess where things are looking like they're going to line up is probably going to be around the end of quarter one. Um, well, not end of quarter one, mid year. It's probably sorry, it's going to be in quarter two most likely. But with that out of the way, do you guys have any questions? If not, that's okay. I can go take a nap or play some card games or something because I have been playing. I've been playing one game in particular a lot. Just some free advertising for these guys. I have been playing Smash Up a lot on my own because I enjoy doing the theory crafting to see how the different factions can fit together and that kind of thing. But I'm going to be quiet and give you guys a chance for questions. Oh man, I always do this. I start the live stream going and I forget to start recording on OBS. It's fine. It's fine. It just affects the video quality that I can upload later. Limits of the Q&A, anything story related, honestly. Anything about magic building, anything about story structure. I love talking story structure and characters and all of that kind of stuff. If you have specific story questions that you're comfortable asking, you can. But a lot of times it is about magic. People asking, how do these limitations work? If you wanted to do this kind of thing, how would you do that? How would you break down this part of this system over there? That kind of thing. Like I had a YouTube comment that I answered. It was on my video about plot problems, and they were asking how I would define it if they solve a plot problem, but then that creates complications. So like clarifying anything from any of the videos, whatever you got. I probably won't ask personal questions like if I've ever killed a man or anything like that, but you can ask. Oh, and back to that kind of weaker but more precise approach. That's one way that you can make characters interesting. Another one of Sanderson's stories. Oh, was it like Radiant Sands or something like that? It was sand magic, and there was a graphic novel for it. But in there, where these people live, it's covered in the areas filled with white sand, and people can use magic to manipulate um, manipulate the sand and have it like reach up as tendrils and stuff to pick things up, push things around, turn it into spears, that sort of stuff. And when they use it, when they use all of the power out of it, the sand turns black and goes inert and they can't use it anymore. But the main character that we're following, he wants to be like an elite mage, but he can only summon one tendril at a time. Most of the masters can summon like a dozen. He can only summon one, but his control over it is much more precise, and that's how he has to end up making use of that kind of thing. So, like, that's another example of that. It's a way that you can make character distinct within the system. That sounds fun to me, Sea Beans. But I'm not. What is your question? Okay, it sounds like you're probably typing. So for anybody who is joining, we're in the Q&A portion, so feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat. I don't think I have any in my question boxes that I have been trying to monitor. And we'll give it another couple minutes. If nobody has questions in the next couple minutes, we'll wrap it up. But yeah, it's release is still a little ways out, but I am pretty stoked for the book. It's lit RPG, and working on getting a better pitch for it. But the pitch I've got so far is that Topha is facing her last chance to undergo the trial of wires and gain immortality inside the worlds of the singularity. And when she makes it inside and gets to her first world, she finds that all of the other externals, player characters, are mysteriously missing and that there are forces in the world that don't want her there. And I love it. I've really, really enjoyed working with my co-author on getting all of it written. And we just have some final stuff we need to clean up. And the only reason the book is waiting that long to come out is because we want to be able to do a closer release between books 1 and 2. So working on book 2 now so that we'll be able to do that. Okay. Well, I think I'm going to call it there. You guys you can email me, you can message me. Oh, okay. I do have some stuff from Sea Beans, but that's point still stands. You can reach out to me on through email. You can message me on YouTube, and I do my best to answer all and respond to most of the comments. Okay. You want some sort of anchor to make sure the paths stay open. First thoughts is constantly high mooks that hold onto the pathways. How appealing that is, it's definitely interesting. Uh, there's a bunch of things you could do to change how that's flavored to make it. I don't know that that's going to be glamorous, right? Being used as an anchor for a pathway. In fact, that might be very harmful, which is why they use mooks to do it instead of specialized units, depending on how you do it. But that could be very interesting, is having people that are basically not catatonic, but they are non-functional because of how dosed they are. what's more, with how the psychic stuff works, there could be uncontrollable side effects for what's going on. It could be that it because 40K has the whole thing where there's stuff in the warp that you don't want coming out of, you don't want finding you in the warp, and you don't want coming out of the warp. From my understanding, that's where the chaos gods come from and many other things. So having something like that where the longer, like, getting the dosage right so they can keep a stable pathway but don't attract the attention of the things beyond, now that starts to introduce a bunch of very interesting complications to this sort of teleportation fast travel stuff that you have going on. I don't know if that answers your question, but as you have it written here, it seems interesting to me. Is it something that I necessarily would want to have or deal with? Maybe not, but that's okay. All right. I'm not seeing any other questions, so we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. And I, yeah, I will talk to you guys later. We'll have another one of these next month. And until that time, just make sure that you guys keep writing and you stay awesome. Oh, no worries, Sea Beans. I do like that idea. That sounds very interesting. But yeah, keep writing. Stay awesome, guys. I'll catch you later.